Welcome back, guys, to another True-vfx Talking Head. Today we're going over why we believe Cycles is better than Eevee, at least currently. I'm here with Richard, and we're going to get into it. So Richard, why do we here at True-vfx hate Eevee?
Because it's garbage.
Garbage!
No, we don't hate Eevee. We don't like using Eevee. Or subjecting our users to use Eevee because we don't think that it has the quality that we want our users to be able to achieve. Mm-hmm. That's the main reason. We don't want people to be having crummy renders and having to jump through all sorts of hoops to get those crummy renders.
Okay, cool. So would you then give us a brief overview of how each render engine works?
Okay. Cycles, Path Tracer, unbiased, basically simulates light. The photons that come from whatever light source, emissive material, whatever it is. Cycles will, as accurately as it can, or as well as the code is written, will simulate photons in real life. And that provides, obviously, photorealistic images. Eevee is a rasterization engine which attempts to fake all of that by using screen space data and some other fancy technical details to mimic a image or something of an image. Game engine versus ray trace engine.
Yeah, okay, great. Exactly. When you say screen space, can you give us some ideas of what exactly what that means?
Yeah, so screen space is quite literally the space that your screen has. That is your viewer, and that is what the engine will use to determine where things are and how things should work. So if you're talking about like reflections, screen space reflections, whatever is visible to the camera, it will then calculate those 3D physical objects or whatever they are, and then it will reflect them in reflective surfaces. It'll essentially mirror them, flip them upside down wherever they're supposed to be reflective, and then project them back onto reflective surfaces.
And there is a Cycles does do a little bit. Eevee does do some overscanning. So just because you don't see it in your screen doesn't mean it's not going to be rendered. There is some overscan, but I don't think you can. I don't think you have that setting available to you.
No, you don't know.
So there is a little bit, but I think we can show some good examples of when reflections or refraction, and I think you were even talking about shadows. How when they're off screen enough, the effect is very obvious. Like there's obviously problems that are going to occur. Yeah.
Which isn't good for the end user, inevitably.
No, and we were talking about this earlier as well. Eevee is actually harder to learn. Cycles, you set up, you put in a glass BSDF shader node, connect it to your output, and you press render, and you have glass. Yeah. Eevee, you have to do more setup. You have to make sure that shadows are rendering transparently, and even then, especially if you have refraction, you're not going to get the refraction light that goes through it like you will Cycles, because that takes actual photons, and it has to calculate which way they go. And Eevee isn't doing the photon calculations. No. It isn't doing that path tracing. So you have to turn that on, and then you have to go in and make sure you have screen space refractions turned on, and you have to make sure refraction is turned on for your material as well. Yeah. So there's more to set up. It's not just one click refraction or glass. It is faster technically, but not as nice of an image, and definitely not as many. It's more complicated. Click wise.
Yeah.
So we've actually made a list, and we've checked it twice, and we're about going to find out why Eevee is naughty and Cycles is nice.
Yep.
So there are some things that Eevee has problems with, just because of the way it is, because it is that raster engine, and because it's not tracking those photons.
Yeah.
We've talked about reflection. We've talked about refraction, which are the main things. Glass doesn't let light through at a normal way that it should. Shadows aren't. You're not getting actual shadows. It's just math based upon location of sun, location of light, shape of object. And it goes from there. And you have to actually up the samples for shadows to be soft and nice looking.
Yeah.
Pretty considerably amount, which does slow it down, but it's still faster to some degree. But now let's talk about specifically. So those are the things that kind of like are frustrating. There's also it's basically a node limit. After so many nodes, there's a good chance you're gonna get some artifacts effectively. There's not an actual limit, but Eevee has limitations because it's using OpenGL.
Yeah.
Will you go through some of those OpenGL limitations with us, Richard?
So yeah, I mean, there's a couple specifically for like Mac users, because Mac or Apple had a hairy fit a couple of years ago and didn't want to support OpenGL anymore, and worked on Metal. OpenGL sort of stopped for Mac users, and it stopped at a time when there was a texture limit. There was a actual texture buffer limit, and I think 16 or 24. But if you go over that, then your textures will show pink because they're no longer available in the buffer. And then on top of sort of that, the other issues that we've got with Eevee, with it being sort of OpenGL and the way the nodes and things work, is that like Zach said, there's no hard number of nodes that you have in a tree that will then lead to slowdowns or something. But it depends on the complexity of those nodes. So because Eevee calculates every node and every single node, the size of the tree actually matters. So the more complex a material, the more complex a shader, the harder it will be for Eevee to update in real time. And that is one of the issues that we face, obviously, with True Terrain. There are other things.
It's a big boy.
It is a big one.
It's a big boy.
There are other things, there are other problems. Some nodes aren't supported. And I think that's less to do with the sort of just being OpenGL and more of it just being like Eevee doesn't support some nodes. Because it's vice versa. Cycles doesn't support some of the nodes that Eevee does.
Yeah.
You know, we don't...
Mainly one for each. Mainly for Cycles, it doesn't support the BSDF to RGB node.
Yeah.
And Eevee doesn't support the Nishida Sky texture option.
Yeah, it doesn't support Nishida Sky specifically because it wasn't developed for Eevee, but Eevee has problems with world lighting anyway. It doesn't support like world lighting anyway. You can see it, but it won't affect. There's no direct lighting from the world.
It's not right. Like shadows aren't not as clear. It doesn't work necessarily as well, right?
No. It'll globally illuminate. So you'll get like the soft colors and you'll get like the projected things, but you won't get any hard shadows. Like no hard light sources in the world will create any shadows. So yeah,
that's why when the other Sky add-ons, when they have their Eevee version, they also give you a
sun lamp. Yeah.
Because that's actually what's doing the lighting.
Yeah.
Or the shadow calculation.
Yeah. Lighting, specular highlights, and your shadows are generated that way. So yeah, I mean, there's that. Those issues that we have, like I say, with the texture limit for Mac users, and then like the sort of node complexity or the shader complexity, they run into big problems with some of our add-ons, specifically True Terrain. And that leaves us in a position where we either have to sacrifice on quality, or sort of sacrifice on usability. And that's one of the reasons that we don't support Eevee in the way that other developers do.
And I would say the biggest feature, or missing lack of a feature that Eevee has, is the lack of instance. So when you scatter using either particle system, which is antiquated and going to be deprecated soon, or using geometry nodes, either way, there are optimizations that happen that Cycles does, where it will take the object of, let's say, a tree, right?
Yeah.
And it'll calculate, it'll understand what the tree is, it'll understand the geometry, it'll load that into memory, and then it will, every time it's duplicated, it's already calculated everything effectively.
Yeah.
And so when you have hundreds or thousands of these trees, you see very, very little slowdown in your renders. But Eevee and the Blender viewport both do not have these optimizations. So you see a considerable difference between the having one of an object scattered versus having hundreds of objects scattered, because it has to calculate each one of those objects, whereas Cycles has it effectively cached.
Yeah.
It has it instanced. Its data is already loaded into it. It doesn't need to load it in for each one of those things, whereas for OpenGL, or at least the way Eevee does it right now, it's not able to do it. And it should be able to. And as I understand with Eevee Next, they might be going into it. And there's a lot of stuff that with Eevee Next that we're really excited about and really interested into seeing what they're going to do. Like Nishida should be supported. So True Sky hopefully will be able to be more compatible with Eevee whenever Eevee Next comes out, or even maybe before. Actually, it might be before, I think.
Yeah.
We were maybe seeing at one of the developer updates. But yeah, instancing with True Train is, I mean, it'll kill your system if you try to use Eevee. I think this is very important to know. You have your wireframe, you have your
solid.
Basically, I call it the Blender, solid mode, but I always call it the Blender viewport. But then you have material preview and actually like render, right? The material preview is always Eevee. It's always Eevee.
Yeah.
And so if you are using the material preview, you are using Eevee. And so instancing in that when using the material thing is going to be slow.
Yeah.
Instancing in the viewport is going to be slow. And that's why we have the viewport display slider that we do, so you can have it considerably smaller. That's why we actually have the add-on, the modifiers in True Terrain for camera culling, occlusion culling, which is it's not a separate modifier, it's a part of the camera modifier. But we also have the distance mask, and we have, am I missing one? Oh, a LOD system.
Yeah.
All these things, they don't really matter for Cycles.
No.
Cycles does not really utilize them the way it needs to. In fact, to some degree, especially like the LOD system, that's actually loading Cycles, more data into it for Cycles. And what we we have planned to do is to eventually have a render toggle, so you can actually say whether you want this modifier to render.
Yeah.
We just haven't implemented it yet. Yeah. We've been doing other things, okay? We created a whole new add-on. What do you want from us? And so, but those things are only really useful if you're using Eevee, or what we designed it more for is the viewport.
Yeah.
As they're useful for the viewport.
Yeah.
And so, that is that, and I think that is the main difficulty with Eevee. If you're having slowdowns with Eevee, it's most likely because of your instance. You're having way too many instances. You have to limit that in the viewport. And then when you render it, if you're not using Eevee anymore, you're using Cycles, make sure to turn off those limiters. Or actually, the LOD I would turn off, but you don't have to turn off the camera culling or the distance mask. Those are probably okay. Unless, I wouldn't use them with trees. Trees would be difficult because you want those shadows that the trees give you, and you don't want trees popping in and out depending upon distance. It's really good. The distance modifier is really mainly for like grass and stuff like that you are not going to see in individual grass things pop up or disappear. Yeah. It's
tough. It's tricky development for the limitations of Blender sometimes.
It is, and you really do have to craft. You have to know your system pretty well, and craft your scenes around what renderer you're going to want to use. If you're going to want to use Eevee, you need to craft your scenes around what Eevee is capable of doing. Same thing with Cycles. If you're wanting to do a non-photorealistic sort of thing and you're using Eevee, you're gonna have a hard time. Eevee might be actually better because it has that BSDF to RGB. You can do a lot more stuff with that. Though with the real-time compositor coming in the future too, that might change.
Yeah, that should do some stuff. And I suppose it's like that you've got to have an expectation too, like as a user. Obviously, we want you to be able to create whatever you want, but there is a limitation on that to a degree, and it's like there are two ends of the spectrum where you've got the people who've got really low-end systems who are having a hard time just doing some basic stuff, and then you've got the people with like really high-end, top-tier stuff who just flood their scenes with everything, and then they're like, "Why is this running like a dog's backside?"
Right.
And it's like because you decided to do 5 trillion polygons
And then adaptive subdivision on top of that.
Yeah. So it's I think it's
and volumetrics
and volumetrics and like
water volumetrics and
geometry nodes and all sorts of other stuff. So I think it's more like you've got to manage your. There's one thing obviously that you taught is to manage the sort of resources that you're using and set your scene up. Like your viewport doesn't need to be pretty. There's no point in that. Like you don't need to see everything that's going on in the viewport. Like once you've done that thing, disable it if you can, and move on to the next thing. Yeah,
you don't need to work in material preview.
No.
It's really, we would only advise working in material preview for, guess what? Previewing materials.
Yeah.
And so if you're not working on shader stuff, don't use it.
No.
Or if you can, if you're like working on shadows and lighting and stuff like that, go to the simplify tab and turn on like that one where it lets you only render a single material on everything. That way you give it a very simple diffuse something or another, and then you can work on it if you're wanting to use Eevee.
Yeah.
Though we have plans for a video about optimizing cycles, and we believe that depending upon your scene, some scenes you're not going to be able to do stuff on just because you're making it too awesome.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of hacks that we have learned. I mean, Eevee is all hacks, but there's some hacks with cycles too. There's some things that you don't need to calculate full global illumination, for example, and stuff like that you can really, really reduce. I mean, we've seen even like half of the times by doing some of these things.
Yeah.
And so, the defaults that Blender comes in are not defaults for your scene.
Nope.
They're defaults for the average user, and they're meant for you to then play with and dive into the Blender manual and dive into these things and understand and to customize to your scene. So we have a video planned for that going into the future.
Yeah.
Richard, did you have anything else to talk about before we kind of
say goodbye to everyone?
The video?
No, more so that sort of this video could be longer, and we do want to do more in depth of this because we enjoy nerding out. Like we enjoy nerding out and talking about this kind of stuff. And if you guys want to be able to see more, or specifically on this topic like Eevee versus cycles, and you want to learn more, then just let us know, and we might do like a live stream, or you can jump in our Discord channel. We'll do like an event or something in Discord, because it's useful information. Like it's boring knowing it, like needing to know it, but once you do know it, it's super useful, and it'll help you in so many different situations.
Yep. All right, guys, that's the video. That's the reasons why we here at True-vfx do not use Eevee, or do not recommend using Eevee, or we do not market our products. We actually even market our products to saying it's not compatible with Eevee, just because of these limitations that really cause you guys problems. So, all right, subscribe and save. Smash that bell. Amazon, don't sue us, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, cool. So, chat, I forgot what I was gonna say. Okay.